Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. How particularly worrying are terrorist attacks on Kashmiri Pandits and minorities in the Kashmir Valley? And what are the urgent steps the government needs to take to tackle this issue? That's the key subject I should discuss today with the former Army Commander, Northern Command of the Indian Army, and one of India's foremost experts on the subject of terrorism, General Deependra Singh Hooda. General Hooda, let's start with why you believe terrorist attacks on Kashmiri Pandits and minorities is a matter of particular concern. Yesterday's Hindu says that there have been 9 deaths in May alone. Writing in the Times of India yesterday, you said minority killings have a larger ramification as they create a sense of panic and fear that is contagious. Could you start by explaining that point a little further, please?
Karan, the reason why I said that is, you know how things are in Kashmir Valley. It's an area that has seen a lot of violence over the years. Why this is of a particular concern is because, one, it spreads, as you said, panic and fear among the minority community. And then you're all seeing that they are clamoring that they want to go back and they go, out of Kashmir Valley into the Jammu region. You're also seeing, Karan, a sort of a pushback in the Jammu region, where we've seen protests also happening in Jammu. And Jammu is a fairly volatile sort of region because it has a mixed Hindu-Muslim population. So you could see also a fallout in the Jammu region, which actually people are not looking very closely at. And at the end of the day, Karan, as I also wrote in the article, you know, this is a war of narratives, and who wins this war is influencing the popular perceptions and the public. So here the government has been saying that there is normalcy. We want to see a resettlement of the Kashmiri Pandits back in the valley, and if you see a sort of a reverse flow that takes place, then are you saying, for example, are the terrorists winning this war of the narrative? And that influences the local population.
Absolutely. Let's in fact explore that war of narratives because those are two further consequences that minority killings lead to. And you mentioned both of them in your Times of India article. First, you say the idea is to destroy the government's credibility by showing that it's powerless to protect the people. Are the terrorists succeeding to some extent? Is the government's credibility being questioned in the valley?
It is, Karan. It is being questioned. As you also mentioned that you are seeing now the minorities leaving the valley, not only Kashmiri Pandits but also the other Hindu minorities who are there for work, etc., coming from different states. We've had a attack on a laborer from Bihar, for example, and so you find these people are leaving. So does it dent the government's narrative of everything is normal? We are able to provide security. And are the terrorists then able to say, look, we have created conditions where we are seeing these minorities sort of almost fleeing the valley or asking the government to be relocated outside the Kashmir Valley? So in this, as I said, this battle of the narratives, who wins is extremely important. You see, the terrorists, as it is, are weaker than the government forces always. So what they rely on is who wins this information war. And whoever wins the information war in conditions like this is able to influence the larger sort of population and people.
Absolutely. And as you suggested, the terrorists are denting the government's narrative. But there is a second consequence of the killing of Kashmiri Pandits and minorities in the Kashmir Valley that you write about, which is potentially even more disturbing. You say, over time, the targeting of innocent civilians can provoke a backlash. Do you have in mind the possibility of action being taken against Muslims in the rest of India?
So a couple of things. The reason why I said backlash, one is, there could be a backlash within the community in Kashmir. After all, it's not only minorities that are being targeted. We are seeing, the Muslims being targeted. We had a sort of that TV presenter. We've had policemen on leave who could be targeted. And therefore, you could see a backlash among the civil society against what the terrorists are doing. Uh, Now, whether the terrorists are really concerned about this is a different matter. But in the long run, you could see. So I said, this is one area, where you could see, and we've already seen, for example, I think the Mufti of Kashmir and the local politicians have all come out against these killings. But the fact is that the terrorists' aim is to create fear and panic, and therefore they are going to continue. And the other backlash I meant was, as I mentioned, are you going to see rising communal tensions happening in the Jammu region? So one could be a sort of a long-term positive, one could be a sort of negative that could happen, Karan.
And rising communal tensions in Jammu would worry you particularly.
They do, Karan. So I commanded my corps in the Jammu region, and really see Kashmir is largely sort of religiously homogeneous. Let us say, very vast majority of the people there are all Muslim. But what you see in the Jammu region is mixed population. So while Jammu may be Hindu-dominated areas like Kishtwar, areas like Doda, the areas like Ramban have a very large mix of Hindu-Muslim population, and so that really, does remain an area of concern. And we have seen in the past, we've had communal incidents in these places.
Now, there's one other thing that you're worried about, and again, you wrote about it very explicitly in your Times of India article. You said, and I'm quoting, there are other worrying indicators in Jammu and Kashmir. Small magnetic bombs are being found in increasing numbers, and there is a concern these would be used to target the Amarnath Yatra. And then you add, terms like white collar terrorist and hybrid terrorist are being used, which show the difficulty of identifying terrorists. Now, as you know, the Yatra starts on the 30th of June, and the government claims a record 8 lakh people are expected. How worried are you?
So there is concern. And Karan, this is not a concern that is being expressed only by me. This is a concern that has been expressed by the police in Jammu and Kashmir, that these magnetic bombs, these sticky bombs as they call them, very large numbers have been discovered. It is suspected that the Katra bus incident was caused by one such bomb. Drones have been found which have been carrying these magnetic bombs, and these are small things. You can just place it on a vehicle, just stick it under or stick it on the side of the vehicle, and there is an explosion. So this is an area of concern. We are also seeing current increasing sort of infiltration. The police is also saying it's becoming much more difficult to identify terrorists. Earlier, Karan, that terrorists would put their photographs on Facebook, on social media, with weapons, sort of glorifying themselves. They are no longer doing that at all. So it's very difficult to find out who is the person who's actually carrying out these attacks using these small pistols. Which is why I said, why are we using terms like white-collar terrorists or hybrid terrorists? Because we feel that these are people who are out in the civil society, go and do just one action and come back home. Not like earlier times when recruits would actually leave their homes and, go and join the terrorists and then remain, outside the society as such. So identification is even, becoming more and more difficult.
This is, in a sense, a double whammy. A, the means they're using, like magnetic bombs, makes terrorism more likely and more possible and easier for them to do. And secondly, if you have hybrid terrorists and white-collar terrorists who go out and do their terrorism and then disappear to their own homes and mingle back into the family, it's hard to identify. This is a double whammy for the state.
It is, which is why, I said towards the end, and maybe we can talk about it, that there is a need to sort of get the locals also involved in this fight against terrorism.
Absolutely, sir. In fact, I'm going to come at this point to the 7 steps that you suggest that the government ought to deploy and ought to deploy almost immediately. And I'll take you through each of those 7 steps one by one, because I think each of them is not just very important, but it's particularly important that the audience should understand the sequence. To begin with, you say, the government must be agile and quick to respond to the tactics being adopted by the terrorists. And then you add pointedly, to do that, it must accept the problem exists. Is there a sense in which the government is in denial or partial denial?
So the thing, Karan, is, the statements that are coming out that, normalcy has been restored, everything is fine. Look at the numbers of tourists, for example, who are visiting. Protests have reduced, stone pelting has reduced. I think you also need to look sort of deeper into what is happening. I've always said this, merely an absence of violence doesn't mean that normalcy has come. You need to look at sort of underlying causes of why the problem in Kashmir exists. And therefore, it could quickly sort of, as we are seeing, terrorists change tactics. And as they change their tactics, the government must be agile enough to sort of respond to that and accept that, yeah, we have a problem at hand. Karan, this is described as a long war. And in this long war, you will have some successes, you will also have some failures. We have to be flexible and smart enough to understand that this is what is happening, this is a problem area, and then devise strategies to be able to overcome that.
Absolutely, General Saab. But when you say it must accept that the problem exists, there is a sense in which they're not accepting either the seriousness or the new character of terrorism. One of the two, they're not prepared to readily accept, which is why they're not in a position to respond effectively.
So, Karan, that's what I'm saying, that, you have to accept that what is happening today is different from, things that have happened in the past. And as I said, you're going to see a constant change in tactics. Let me tell you, it is not necessary that they're going to continue to, just target minorities, for the next 6 months or 1 year. You could see a slight change in tactics. We've seen in the past, for example, grenade hurling in crowded areas, etc. So we need to sort of be on top of the loop in this. And the first thing, Karan, is to accept that there is a problem. If we don't accept that there is a problem, how are we going to find solutions for it?
Absolutely. Now, the second advice you give the government, and I'm deliberately calling it advice to the government, is when you write, Kashmir's Pandits must be relocated to a safer place, even outside Kashmir. But as you know, the government is very reluctant to do that. And on the 4th, an unnamed senior officer told NDTV that even relocating them to Jammu, leave aside outside the state altogether, but even relocating them to Jammu would be tantamount to ethnic cleansing. So clearly, it doesn't seem as if the government is willing to heed your advice.
So, Karan, it's up to the government whether they want to heed the advice or not. The reason why I made this advice is for a couple of reasons. The first reason is, what is the primary responsibility of the state? And the primary responsibility of the state is to protect its people. And I understand this could be seen as a temporary setback to government plans, and they've been talking a lot about resettling Kashmiri Pandits back into the valley. But doesn't the government have to have a responsibility, one, to make sure that its people are safe and secure? And secondly, Karan, if we are going to provide targets to the terrorists in Kashmir and they're able to succeed even in 1 or 2 more minority killings, I think the setback to the government will be much larger and much greater. As I said, this is a war of narratives. What is true is what people believe to be true. And again, they will show, look, the government has no credibility because it's not been able to protect the Kashmiri Pandits. So I think it suits both the government by sort of removing soft targets, and secondly, the sense of security among the people gets built up. And we've seen, the Kashmiri Pandits are saying that we feel unsafe. So we have a responsibility towards them.
Absolutely. Now, your third advice actually goes at a much deeper level. You say, and I'm quoting you, security forces must realign their operational focus to give primacy to the security of the civilian population. And you add, I am not suggesting terrorists should not be eliminated, but greater effort should be directed towards making the population feel safe by the presence of security forces. And the question that occurred to my mind is, why isn't this already happening? As you said, keeping the population secure is the first duty, and yet this is precisely what you have to advise the government to do.
So, Karan, what is, and I've said this and it is no sort of secret, is that our focus is too much towards security parameters, towards violent incidents, towards the number of terrorists that have been killed, how many stone pelting incidents we have reduced. And I think this very security centric focus only looks at one aspect of how to find and resolve internal conflicts. We keep saying that insurgencies, internal conflicts are people centric, and therefore people must be at the heart of finding a solution. And in that, a sense of safety and security among the people is key to their believing that we have a government in place that is going to keep us safe. If they think that they are at threat by terrorists, they could be killed, they could be injured at any time, the confidence in the government is lost. Which is why I said, can we start sort of realigning some of our focus? And we have enough police and we have enough military presence there, to moving amongst the people, patrolling in areas, showing your sort of flag, as they say, to tell people, listen, we are there and we are here to protect you. This is a slight change in focus that I think needs to come in.
In fact, the remaining 3 points that you've listed in your Times of India article, which I'm now going to turn to, not only go deeper and deeper, but require a more critical change in focus by the government. First, you say, and again I'm quoting you, experienced police officers of Jammu and Kashmir must be empowered to revive their networks with local contacts and help bring down terrorists. Now, to my mind, this is elementary policing. Why was it allowed to lapse? And did it lapse because the authorities lost trust in local Kashmiris?
So, Karan, there is some talk, some reported in the media, some that in my own conversations with people, is that people had come in from outside and they were given greater responsibilities, and some responsibilities from the local police were taken away. I firmly believe that the local police has fought this terrorism for more than 30 years. And after the initial very, very difficult years, they are the ones who actually, along with the army, had brought the situation, sort of under control. They have contacts with the locals. They live amongst the people, Karan. And so therefore, I made this point about greater empowering of the local police. I am not even suggesting that people who come in from outside the state are inefficient, etc. But it's just that the local police has much greater local knowledge, and therefore, I think can help by greater empowerment.
Absolutely. The local police belong to the region. They know the people, they know the area, they have contacts, they have families. They therefore have an entree to people that we should be benefiting from rather than cutting ourselves off from.
Absolutely, Karan. Absolutely.
In a sense, General Hooda, your fifth point is particularly important. You call for, and again I'm quoting you, genuine outreach to civil society, particularly the youth. And then you add, it must also be ensured that there are no attempts to demonize the society for the wrongdoings of a few. Now, when I read that, I said to myself, General Hooda is as good as asking the leopard to change his spots. Demonizing Muslims seems to have become a habit of Indian governments both at the center and in Srinagar. You're actually telling them, stop it. This is the wrong way to handle the situation.
See, Karan, ultimately, I think we will win this fight against terrorism. And let me tell you, no local is happy with these targeted killings, whether it is of minorities or whether it is of Muslims. I don't think anybody accepts. Ultimately, we have to co-opt the locals in this fight. And if it's the locals who sort of turn against the, you know, the terrorists and the militants, then frankly, the fight is almost won. I think there is not enough outreach to the civil society, to the young people who are there. I mean, just as in the rest of India, about between 65-70% people living in Jammu and Kashmir are below 35 years old. And how old is this insurgency? It's 35, 33, 34 years old. So this is a group that has grown up seeing nothing but violence and insurgency in the valley. I think there is a greater sort of outreach required towards them, a greater outreach towards civil society. And I firmly believe that, yes, there are bad elements within that society. There is an element of extremism and radicalization that is there. But I think to sort of demonize the whole society and say all Kashmiris are like this, I think would not be right.
Can I ask you a question at this point? Do you believe the government will heed this particular advice? Do not demonize the whole society for the wrongdoings of a few. Do you genuinely believe that this will be listened to?
See, Karan, I'm sure the government also wants the problem to be resolved. I don't think the government wants these terrorist acts to continue, and what is happening. After all, its credibility is also at stake, and therefore this is something that it needs to do. Now, what it does, what advice it heeds, I mean, I'm in no position to say. But if we are genuinely wanting to find a solution, as we say, let's go local. I think we need to go local in this case also.
Absolutely, for its own sake, if not for the sake of the Kashmiri people, the government needs to heed your advice. Now, finally, you say something which, again, I suspect will go against the grain of the government. You say local politicians must be co opted in the fight against fears spread through terrorism. But as far as I recall, apart from one meeting in June, the government refuses to talk to the National Conference, to the PDP, even to Sajjad alone. Instead, as you know, it's opened up cases against them. Earlier, it arrested and jailed them. Do you really see the government's attitude to Farooq Abdullah, Mehbooba Mufti, Sajjad alone changing?
See, again, Karan, I'm not answerable to what the government will do or not do. I'm only suggesting that what we are seeing in the valley today, we are seeing a rise of violent extremism. We are seeing a rise of terrorist incidents, particularly against the minority community and against other locals. And if we have to win this, we need to bring in the local politicians. I mean, we might, whatever we might think of them, the fact is that, they do have some sort of popular base, and they can sort of appeal to that, their popular base. If there is vacuum, if there is a sort of vacuum where people can't voice their opinion, I mean, who is going to fill that vacuum? If there are no sort of political voices coming out, that vacuum is going to be filled by extremist noises. It's the terrorist narrative which is going to find sort of space. And therefore, I think there is a need that you bring in the local politicians on board. I also believe that sometimes we think these politicians are all sort of themselves have separatist sort of kind of tendencies. But tell me, Karan, rise of terrorism, rise of violent extremism within the state, is it going to suit the local political leaders? It is not going to suit them, because it is only hitting their constituency. So I firmly believe that there is a need that you need to bring in these people into the whole process of getting together and trying to find some kind of solution to violence in the Kashmir Valley.
Absolutely. Local politicians have a vested interest in ending the terrorism, because otherwise the vacuum their absence will create will be filled by the terrorists. Their life depends, or their political careers depend on ending terrorism, which is why They would be not just willing, but natural partners of the government. This is why the government must reach out to them.
See, listen, political ideologies could be different, and surely, everybody has a right to sort of practice his own sort of brand of politics, as long as it is not considered something that goes against national interest. So there will be differing viewpoints on what to do and how to deal with it. Uh, but I think it is important. Just as I said, you need to co-opt locals. You need to also co-opt local leaders, local political leaders.
Absolutely. Now, your conclusion, if I can call it that, you don't call it your conclusion, but as I read your article, it seemed to me this was your conclusion. You say if this battle is to be won, the government must be flexible enough to change track when necessary. Everything depends on that flexibility, that willingness by the government to change track. Do you see signs of that flexibility, or are you hoping it exists, even if it's not visible at the moment?
See, Karan, I do see concern in the government about what is happening in the Kashmir Valley, because frankly, as I said, uh, they had made it sort of a very strong point that we will bring in normalcy, we will resettle Kashmiri Pandits, and if the reverse is happening, they have to take it seriously. And from what I know, it is a matter of concern for the government. Now the thing is, if it is a matter of concern, do you need to relook your strategy that you have been practicing, and you need to do a little change in that strategy? I can only advise now. It is up to the government or not, whether they would like to change their approach, whether they think, as they say, an iron fist approach and putting more sort of security focus is going to sort this out, or will it be done by looking at other aspects, uh, as I said, like a local outreach, greater dependence on locals, taking them on board.
Absolutely. You remind me of that famous saying by the Cambridge economist John Maynard Keynes, who once said, when facts change, I change my thinking, sir. What do you do? And what you're saying to the government is the facts have changed. It's time to change your thinking too. But let me put to you, literally as my last question, a very different, if not polar opposite viewpoint to yours. In the Times of India yesterday, the Kashmiri Pandit author Rahul Pandita said this, and he was writing about his fellow Pandits. He said, they have no future whatsoever in Kashmir, not tomorrow or day after, not in 5 years, not in 10. He believes it's over for them, there's no future. How would you respond to him?
So, Karan, as I said, this is a long war, and for now it does appear, because with the way the Kashmiri Pandits are going back, but I think there is also a sort of sentiment. This is something I think that is left over. Uh, are we saying that we can resolve the Kashmir issue only by looking at uh, the Muslim sentiment and Muslim population? I think the Kashmiri Pandit sentiment is equally important, and they need some kind of sort of closure. So I'm hoping, if things go well, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years down the line, maybe there conducive conditions can be created. But for that, as I said, you need an approach that combines. In the army, we say, an iron fist and a velvet glove. So you need to tackle the terrorists. You need to make sure overground workers, etc., are not able to spread panic and fear. But you also have to look at the root causes of the problem, the alienation, the angst amongst the people, the fact that there are issues of identity crisis in the valley, the fact that there is radicalization and extremism. All these things have to be tackled simultaneously, just as you get after the terrorists.
But you disagree with Rahul Pandita when he says that there is no future whatsoever in Kashmir for the Pandits. That is a point you don't accept.
So, Karan, I'm saying that because, see, finally, you can't ignore their sentiment at all, and there is a sentiment that we have been driven out forcefully from the Kashmir Valley. and therefore we should find some acceptance to go back to our homes. Now, I know a lot of time has passed, and a lot of the younger generation doesn't feel this way. But as long as there are a few, who have that sentiment, some kind of, as I said, that sentiment needs to be addressed. Now, whether conditions can be created or it cannot be created, whether they should give up, again, Karan, is a question you should ask the Kashmiri Pandits, and you might find different opinions amongst them.
Absolutely. But I want to thank you, General Hooda, for two things in particular: for explaining clearly, if not bluntly, and certainly forthrightly, the dangers of terrorist attacks on Kashmiri Pandits and minorities in the valley and the ramifications it can have, not just in the valley, but in the rest of the country. And then I want to thank you for spelling out in detail, but precisely, the 7 things the government must do. I hope the government is listening, and I hope they realize that when the facts change, they need to change their thinking. I hope that flexibility that you spoke about, the willingness to change tack, as you called it, is there, and I hope they act on it. Thank you very much for this interview, General Hooda. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you.